Hello everyone, good to see you all here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Dana Al-Marashi and I head the Department of Cultural Diplomacy at the UAE Embassy in Washington, DC. Welcome to our first iteration of our virtual discussion series. Over the next couple of months, the Department of Cultural Diplomacy will be organizing talks, cooking demonstrations, virtual iftars, and so much more. We want to make sure that our audiences are aware of all the recent amazing virtual platforms that were introduced into the UAE cultural scene. Please visit our new Instagram account at UAE Culture USA and www.uaeUSAUnited.com/virtual experiences to learn more. I'm joined here today with my colleagues from Meridian International Center and a group of very talented individuals who I was lucky enough to get to know during a trip we organized to the UAE last November. These delegates are all highly influential and respected in the field of architecture in the United States. Today's discussion will highlight their experiences whilst in the UAE. We'll also hear from Reem Khurshid, Sultan Al-Ramahi, and Adina Hempel, who themselves are respected colleagues and experts in the UAE architectural scene. You will also have the opportunity today to see some wonderful photographs the delegates took during their trip to the UAE and learn about our upcoming exhibition, which will open in Los Angeles at the Architecture and Design Museum later this year. Fingers crossed. We will take some questions from the audiences at the end of the discussion. Thank you again for joining us today for what I am sure will be a very informative and engaging discussion. I will now hand it over to Terry Harvey, Vice President of Cultural Programs from Meridian International Center, who will kick things off. TK, over to you.
Thanks, Donna. Again, my name is Terry Harvey. I'm the Vice President of the Meridian Center for Cultural Diplomacy based in Washington, D.C. Meridian is a not-for-profit organization based in the nation's capital, really committed to the idea that we are stronger at home when globally engaged. We're committed, our mission is to foster global leadership through the exchange of people, ideas, and the arts. My group, the Meridian Center for Cultural Diplomacy, has long partnered with the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates, really helping to put their best foot forward and educating Americans about this fascinating place. We'll begin our discussion. I've broken this up into three teams. The first team is the Sharjah team, and it sort of goes along the way of much of how the program started. The delegation we put together for November, we began our trek in Sharjah, where Miss Reem Khurshid led a phenomenal walking tour through the streets of Sharjah with these amazing photographers, writers, and scholars. Reem, perhaps you could say a little bit more about yourself and where you guided us in Sharjah, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Dana, and thank you, Terry, for the introduction and inviting me here today. I will try to be as fast as possible because I know to not take anyone's time. My name is Reem Khurshid. I'm an architect and currently working as the lead researcher of Building Sharjah, a forthcoming book about the history of modern architecture and urbanism. In Sharjah. I was invited last year to give an architecture tour, and at that time, I have been working in that book for almost 2 years, along with my colleagues, Chaudhry and Sultan Al-Qasimir. I think at that time we documented around 300 buildings and structures in Sharjah that were designed between the 1960s until the 1980s. And setting up the tour route depended on a lot of logistical factors like the timing and the walkability, of course. But we aim to inspect several building typologies that capture important moments in the history of Sharjah, with a starting point at the old Sharjah city that existed prior to the city's modern master plan and urban infrastructure planning. But then we walked through another moment of Sharjah's construction boom happening after the oil discovery until maybe the 80s, like buildings designed and constructed in the 80s, which were erected during the Islamatization period of the late 1970s and early 80s, when the Emirate decided to adopt this Islamic identity for itself. And I think that's all I will hand over the microphone to you, Tavi.
Yeah, it was an incredible glimpse into the modern architectural heritage of Sharjah, and I want to kick it over to Sam Lubell. Sam, maybe you can introduce yourself and perhaps your impressions of that of your visit to Sharjah, and maybe specifically the triennial that we were able to attend.
Yeah, we were incredibly lucky, just in general, to be on this trip, and we kind of, we thought we knew what we were going to see, and obviously, as always, we were wrong, and we discovered new things. And one of them was definitely Sharjah, which is a town that before this trip I had never heard of, and I think a number of, I should say, it's an emirate and a city that I had never heard of, and a lot of my colleagues had never heard of, and we got to know it. And as you mentioned, we had a fantastic tour, and just discovered that it's an emirate and a city that is really in tune. I think culturally, architecturally, with sort of, it feels very contemporary, because it's not just a city that's moving kind of into the future but just for the fact of moving to the future. It's moving ahead, but it's also keeping really kind of cherishing its built past at the same time. Which is something where I'm from, I love about where I'm from in New York, and I think a lot of successful cities are able to do both, move into the future and sort of cherish its past and use that as a springboard to make it culturally relevant. I didn't know it was such a great cultural place. So many museums, and the triennial was really an eye opener for that. And I know that Craig and Darren and some other people are going to talk about this, but I can briefly just say, for me, the triennial, the thing that really hit that home for me was just the venues that we were able to visit. And we love the pieces in there, but the venues, including the old vegetable market, which was the first place we went, with its kind of amazing, it's a, an older building, with its concrete and plaster walls and sort of these amazing block screen pattern windows to kind of let the shade in. So it's sort of has some modern techniques, steel truss roof, but then it looks back to the past with these old kind of arched openings to come into the doorways, these pattern block on the windows. The way that the market sort of curves around, sort of leads you on a way to kind of invite you in, kind of taking from old techniques, but also felt modern for its time. So I love the fact that they were looking back to the past, as well as the school that we were able to visit, with this sort of incredible modern vernacular, but done in brick, and just dotted with different buildings around a courtyard. So embracing the old technique of courtyard housing and development in a modern vernacular. So those are just a couple of the examples. And Craig and I were just before this talking a little bit about just the idea of some of the pieces in there that we really enjoyed. And I think Craig, I don't know if you want to weigh in, but some of the things that we were really impressed with were similarly looking at modern techniques. Like there was one piece in the show that 3D printed some amazing patterns and images of Ethiopian kind of forests that are now under threat of development. So it's sort of looking at current threats, but then printing pictures of this amazing old forest onto really high-tech 3D printed kind of fiberglass, but done in a way that it looks like old rocks and old stones. So it's really that old and the new kind of coming together again. Just really was blown away by that kind of really felt really real and contemporary and authentic. And I think that's what I loved about Sharjah.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, it was kind of a surprise, right? We didn't really know what to expect when we got there. And I felt as if we found ourselves in a very surreal environment at that market building. Also, very thankfully, we were alone in the building. I believe that morning was a big press preview. So everybody was over at the other facility, and we found ourselves wandering by ourselves through this amazing space. I was certainly impressed by it. Craig, I wonder if you could introduce yourself and also share impressions of Sharjah and the triennial.
Yeah, happy to. Craig Steely, I'm an architect. And to kind of follow up with what Sam was saying, it's like I've been to a lot of, triennials, architecture, biennials, things like that. And one of the things that it's most interesting is just how it sort of is representative of a certain area. And I was really impressed by how specific it was. I felt really lucky walking through that old souk and sort of being there and getting able, again, like with these things, I think it's interesting because, you know, we see architecture, but talking about architecture and sort of explaining architectural ideas without architecture is always, it's different. And everyone, I think, sees it differently, just like languages are different. And I think that was a great way to sort of start. I mean, for me at least, it was a great way to start the sort of tour of Sharjah, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. I mean, you know, following up after the biennial, like again, like Reem's walk through Sharjah was fantastic. I mean, I couldn't believe, like, I mean, I was really impressed by, you know, there was this sort of like this really, I'd never seen something like this, more or less this sort of like Middle Eastern type of modernism that's was so appropriate to the site, in the sense that it wasn't like, it was so specific, like in particular, like those I think they were the Bank Street apartments. Those blew me away in that sense that they were sort of like dealing with temperature in sort of these like really specific ideas. Like it was almost like dealing with through solids and through layers and screens. And there was a real sinuousness to all of these buildings and all this modernism I saw, this sort of like, it was really calligraphic, like calligraphy, which, yeah, these buildings in particular, I think these are really great in the sense that they were so block-like, but then again, like that sinuous line, I think is so specific to that. It's sort of a modernism that you don't see. Actually, that other building was really, that you showed too. Was that the National Tourist Agency, the one with the curves that were in and out, that one. Again, like just using the light, the natural light and the shadow were really great. But yeah, the Trino was great. It was also really fun walking through with Sam, because I mean, Sam's been doing a lot of these never built exhibits, one for New York, one for LA, he's doing another one in Paris. That's not a plug for Sam's stuff. But it was really interesting, again, that whole aspect of how do you present architectural ideas? Because architecture, it can be such a visual thing and it can be viewed visually, but there's always so much more to architecture than just what you see. And I was really, really impressed by that.
Yeah, I think Craig and Darren and a few of us were walking through, and I was impressed as a curator with some of the, specifically, there was one where, and sorry I don't have the names of the pieces, but it was sort of forming kind of desert dunes in the side of the school building.
Yeah, the one outside with the bricks.
Yeah. So it's sort of combining natural forms, but also traditional kind of old kind of building techniques in there. But all felt very, very modern at the same time. And I think when I'm showing architecture as a curator, it's always key for me to not make it seem as like an art piece, but it feels like an architectural experience, like a spatial experience. And that really, I was walking on top of the dunes and walking underneath them and walking through them, and that really hit home. And then there was another piece that had these giant models, architectural models. And, we all know about architectural models, but these were really just the scale of them, and they were embedded with audio, which I'd never thought of doing. So it's like you're experiencing it in more ways than just the physical even, and the visual. And the fact that they merged, it wasn't just a model that has one type of style. It's a merger of, some of them had modern, and they had historical, and they had postmodern, all in one building, one model. And also they had, different ways of living, courtyard housings merged with the, slab typologies, and just kind of really rethinking the way that, for me, that you can kind of show architecture to audiences in new ways. So I was really impressed with that.
Yeah, our trip to Sharjah allowed us to wipe the slate clean of any preconceptions we would have had of UAE architecture. It was an excellent way to start our tour. I'll kick it over to Darren. Perhaps, Darren, you can introduce yourself and share kind of what your overall impressions are of Sharjah.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm an architectural photographer. I do a lot of, I shoot a lot of contemporary work for architects that are practicing today, obviously, but I'm really probably best known for photographing mid-century modern architecture in the context of today. And so, I mean, I've had the opportunity in 2019 of going twice to the UAE, thanks to the delegations to Meridian and the UAE Embassy in DC. And I was really very fortunate to have that opportunity. It was really quite a transformative experience for me, I would say, because prior to that, I mean, I'd certainly understood, I'd heard about the UAE largely through Dubai and through Formula One races in Abu Dhabi and stuff like that, you know, but it wasn't really, I didn't really have a real sense of place there. I mean, what I understood was really the glitzy high rises, the sense of this sort of modern architecture that was, you know, high rises and shiny new and lots of money, and almost like Las Vegas in the Arabian desert was sort of my view of it before going there. So going to then a place like Sharjah was really eye-opening for me because it did have a level of authenticity, of a sense of place that I really wasn't expecting. When we went through to go to the museums the first time I was there, and then the second as well, I mean, it was just seeing, it felt like a real city. It felt like a place that had a lot of social fabric and a lot of cultural fabric, and just the buildings, as Craig and Sam said, were really adapted to the place. But one thing that struck me is Sharjah, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi all are very distinct. I mean, people tend to lump UAE as a single place, but you really, if you go to visit each of the three Emirates, you really see how different they are. All of them do have historical mid-century modern architecture, but the fabric of the cities are all very different. They were all planned very different. They were all designed very differently. So there is a real sense of place in each of the three Emirates that I thought was very striking. In Sharjah in particular, it felt, I mean, it was really in the pre-oil time, before the 1960s, before oil was discovered there, it was already a fairly substantial city that had a lot of development. It was a transport hub. It was the first airport in the UAE. The first port was from the UAE was there. It was sort of a colonial hub, administrative hub. And so there were a lot of Europeans there. There was a lot more influence from the rest of the world that the other Emirates might not have had as much of. So what you see in Sharjah is this sort of blending of kind of European or Western urban fabric and design ideas melded in with this sort of Arabic architecture and this Arabian a sense of identity that that's very different from the other places, the other Emirates. And I'll let the others talk more in detail about how those, like how Dubai and Abu Dhabi are different. But Sharjah, to me, I mean, you saw roundabouts, like traffic carousels, like you would see in Europe. You saw lots of parks and open plazas and gardens and things that are mixed in with these buildings that sort of have an interesting hybrid of classic European mid-century modern architecture and but also adapted to that region, to that culture, to that climate, to that sense of place. So that was the thing that I thought was so different, unique about it.
Darren, you'll be able to leave walking tours of your own soon over here.
Happily, anytime.
So Angie, I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and what sort of takeaways you were able to draw from your time in Sharjah.
Okay, thanks. My name's Angie. I'm a photographer here in Chicago. And much like what the rest of these guys have said so far, I had very similar impressions of the city. Prior to going here, I had never heard of it, like Sam mentioned, so I didn't really have the preconceived notions that I think most people have when you think of the UAE. Like Darren said, the glitzy skyscrapers and very modern and contemporary architecture. So I didn't really know what to expect. And the walking tour, I think, was a really great way for us to experience the city and explore, you know, what it has to offer, what it looks like. To me, it kind of feels like frozen in time a little bit compared to the other cities that we went to. with its very, like Darren said, the very mid-century modern architecture, which I fully did not expect anywhere over there. So that was, you know, kind of an interesting surprise, and definitely quite a bit in Sharjah. So yeah, it was a great way to, you know, like TK said, to start off the trip, because it's not something that any of us were expecting. And it kind of set up, like, from a historical perspective, what the city and countries like outside of these, you know, notions that we have over here in the United States of, you know, like Darren said, kind of like a Vegas of the Middle East. So yeah, I really thought it was fascinating. I really do think also what was interesting in the trip in general was that period of time where the country was like requiring an Arabic element to be part of the architecture, and the way that you see that throughout all of the cities and the way that that's incorporated is pretty fascinating, and, you know, not something that, you know, we're used to having, you know, pushed on us over here. So, like, the fact that that happened for a period of time really makes things unique over in the cities and throughout the buildings.
Yeah, and I want to let folks know, I mean, we brought these photographers and writers over. I want to let folks know that we are intending to curate this content into a traveling exhibition that will begin in LA, which we'll get to in a moment, and then move on to 2 host cities in the United States, really intended to educate Americans about the history of architecture in the UAE. Darren, I wonder if you might be able to share a little bit on what you think or what you hope visitors to the exhibition will learn about Sharjah specifically. And you've alluded to a lot of that already in your opening statements, but perhaps you can add more.
Well, certainly shattering preconceived notions is the overarching theme, I would say. Getting a chance to understand the fabric of the city, and I mean, to me, I think it would be nice to get people interested in actually going, because as Sam and Craig said as well, architecture is about the experience. It's not just a visual medium. It's just painful for me to say as a photographer, as an architectural photographer. It's true that I don't think you can really get a true sense of a building or of a project or a place without visiting. So I hope that, if nothing else, I hope this encourages people to go visit Sharjah, because I think that it's really an extraordinary place. And I too hadn't really heard of it, or I guess I'd heard the name, but wasn't even sure where it was, to be honest, before visiting in March for the first time. And so it was really a pleasant surprise. The second thing I hope that it does is that it encourages the people of Sharjah to have some pride of place, and that it increases the level of preservation there. And people realize that there is a value in these buildings and create in the soul and the fabric of what they are, and that there's also a lot of tourism to be had in seeing them and experiencing them for themselves.
Great. Well, rounding out our Team Sharjah segment, Craig, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Of course, given your work as a residential architect and perhaps your attention to intimate living spaces, how does the space in which we quarantine in this new reality sort of typically drive the mood and psyche of a person? And what are some easy ways to ensure we all reside in a positive environment? I guess, in other words, how can architecture affect the psyche?
Oh, that's perfect topical kind of point. I think, like, you know, there's obviously, like, there's an inner architecture of the psyche of how, you know, what we think about, but thinking about it in a purely sort of physical way, like the space that you work in. I mean, you know, it's sort of been, I've just been thinking about, like, how we're, you know, as my office, how we're sort of coping with it and dealing with this. It's, in a way, it's like, I think we've become actually adept at this, because we've done this for a while, sort of working remotely, working on projects in different countries, different cities, and working in different places. But I mean, for me, like, one of the things is just like keeping sort of like, you know, working in a place where working in a place in your house or where you are, there's a dynamic of sun and light through the day. You know, that seems to help me a lot. That's sort of like that idea of a schedule and seeing the day change. So you actually kind of, you know, just again, that movement of sun and light through the day, that seems important to me. You moving and working in different places, like creating indoor-outdoor spaces as much as possible to sort of stay productive. You know, I also think it's like in this sort of time where I think it's also, and this goes back to that sort of inner architecture, you know, I feel like it's a complicated time, and I think it's just everyone needs to sort of be kind to themselves in a way and sort of allow these emotions and feelings to happen, you know, feelings of boredom, feelings of anxiety, of anxiousness, and sort of go with those and flow with it. I mean, to me, it's like, the more productive I am is if I can stay sort of in the present and in the now and doing what I'm working on and doing sort of the best I can with that. So, I mean, those are some ideas and some approaches that I've been using for myself, and other ideas that we kind of always work at. It seems like a lot of the clients that we work with and have are doing something that they love to do, and they do it in a flexible way. They're able to work from home. They're able to work from different places. So, I mean, those are just some approaches that we've been using and kind of are thinking about for these.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Thank you all for that great glimpse into what's happening in Sharjah. We're going to shift now to Abu Dhabi. We'll first start off with Sultan Al Ramahi. If you could introduce yourself and share a little bit more about where you led us on the walking tour in Abu Dhabi, and we'll go from there.
All right. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, my name is Sultan Ramahi. My background is in architecture and a bit of fine arts. I'm not going to go into like way back in the whole story, but I just wanted to say a quick one of how it kind of led me giving you guys a tour. Was basically the last 2 years before all this, I've just been giving tours on and off again to visiting consultants and designers in Abu Dhabi. And it's basically what's happening every month. And I think that's when I kind of started really appreciating the city that I grew up in, that I had kind of forgotten about, and just appreciating the kind of modern architecture heritage that is so much in Abu Dhabi, and just kind of appreciating it. And because we had a lot of these designers who were coming into the UAE for the first time, I was the one kind of introducing them to the building, the architecture, and of course, I always wanted to push the aspect of getting them away from the whole, you know, glass towers and steel and stuff like that, and getting them back to kind of, I would call it the vernacular of Abu Dhabi and what was built from the 60s to basically the 90s. So just kind of giving them just so much tours, I kind of just ended up giving a tour to you guys. And really, I just wanted to push, because Abu Dhabi as a city, as the island, most of the population back in the 60s and 70s and 80s were living at the north of the island. And that's where we saw the big kind of explosion of modern heritage. And then there was kind of more random spots throughout the city, like the National Stadium. But really where I wanted to take you was, I would say, the two main boulevards of Abu Dhabi. And not only just filled with beautiful architecture, was because it's such a shared memory. Everyone in Abu Dhabi was living in a 5-10 minute drive from those streets. So everyone who's been living or from Abu Dhabi or resident or local has a connection to that street and those buildings that I took you and we walked through, walked around. And I really just, I really wanted to push that. I love that area of Abu Dhabi. It's the area with the most energy, the most, just the most energy out of anywhere you see in Abu Dhabi. And yeah, I'd say that's it.
Yeah, it was a real nice glimpse to walk down that boulevard, and you were so great in sort of sharing nostalgia as we're walking through, and sort of places of remembrance, and really and underscoring the role that architecture plays in our personal lives. It's not just a structure, so we really appreciated that. And I think much of that you'll underscore in your contribution to the exhibit, which we'll get to later. So I want to kick it over to Layla, who perhaps you can introduce yourself, Layla, and your impressions of Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, so I'm Layla Waba. I'm the Deputy Director over at the A+D Museum in Los Angeles. But I mean, my impressions of Abu Dhabi are kind of all focused around the idea of nostalgia and public space, which I guess shows that Sultan did his job super well. But basically, when we were walking around there, what really struck me was we stumbled upon a fish and fruit and vegetable market. And that was kind of the first time we had gone inside and seen one actively. I know Sharjah was in one technically, the biennial, but I mean, that was an amazing experience. It kind of drew away from that stereotype of the UAE for the first time in a really intense way. And I guess the stories of Sultan's childhood, and I think it was a Burger King.
Yeah, that's right.
Sure. And all the birthday parties there. To me, that struck me as like really strong, but the idea of the divide was still there. So it's always this divide between the hyper contemporary and kind of the architecture of the 70s and 80s that provide that public space. And I don't know, like I thought that was really fascinating. I come from an anthropology background, not an architecture background. So to me, that's kind of what struck me. But then looking at, I'm going to butcher this name, so I'm really sorry, but Qasr al-Husn. Yeah, so that space to me was kind of the perfect marriage between the history of Abu Dhabi and the kind of contemporary appreciation for the culture. And to me, that was really interesting to see how you can marry those two even further. So yeah.
Yeah, it was, I think that was pretty much a great takeaway, at least that we all share the same. And I wonder, Natalie, if you could introduce yourself briefly and kind of share your impressions of Abu Dhabi.
Sure. I'm Natalie Christensen. I am an artist. My medium is photography. I would not refer to myself as an architectural photographer, but most of my work includes architectural or street elements. My work is about shape, light, and shadow in suburban and urban environments. It's gestural, it's usually made on the fly. So the tour of Abu Dhabi was perfectly matched for that because it was just a visual feat. We were moving around really quickly. We were taking in, you know, all this scenery. I didn't always know what I was looking at, but I could point my camera in any direction and find something that fascinated me, including streets and traffic cones. I found those as sometimes as interesting as, you know, the most important architectural specimen in front of me. But some of the standouts in Abu Dhabi, and please correct my pronunciation, but the Obaid Al Mazroui building, the Connect 4 building that had the big circular windows. Every window told a story, and I could have photographed that space for hours. Also, the bus station in Abu Dhabi we had, you know, maybe 10 minutes there, but I found that place to be just fascinating. The color, the shapes. And then the mosque that was next to Qasr al-Husn. I didn't get a great photograph of it. I'm sure lots of you did. But oh my goodness, the geometric forms and the way the light hit the building. We were there in late afternoon. It was just stunning. So yeah, there were just so many things about Abu Dhabi. Of course, the Louvre, I can't believe I haven't mentioned that one yet, but yeah, it's just so much to see. I would love to go back. I'm embarrassed to say I had to Google Abu Dhabi before I went. Like, I knew the name, but where is that? And boy, did I learn.
Yes. Well, thank you. And Brian, would love to kick it over to you to allow you to introduce yourself and kind of give your takeaways of your experience in Abu Dhabi.
Sure, yeah. Okay, I'm Brian Moore, and I'm a photographer based in Huntington Beach, California. I have to say it was a delightful experience being able to visit the UAE, and the opportunity to talk about Abu Dhabi in particular is quite meaningful because I think of the 3 Emirates that we visited, I have probably stronger memories about the Abu Dhabi than the others, really. You know, the fantastic architecture, it was mentioned before, the Louvre, for example, and that fantastic roof that filters light, the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, such a magnificent building. Masdar City was just phenomenal. I would love the opportunity to see and spend more time there. The Museum of the Future, which we got to go inside, is not yet finished, or it wasn't at that time. What a fantastic experience. But I think overall for me, the thing that I'll retain the longest is the Qasr Al Hosn complex. That's the cultural and historical center of Abu Dhabi, and the Abu Dhabi government has really tried to expand it into something very, very meaningful for their own people, I think, as well as for visitors such as us. On the one end of the complex, you've got the Qasr Al Hosn fort. Then on another end, you've got the cultural center, and then on the other end, you've got the prayer hall. And separating the three is this design element, which is intended to represent the desert environment. It's just absolutely phenomenal. So that for me was the amazing thing. And, you know, surrounding the whole complex is all the high rises and such as you see in the photograph there, you know, but it really, the Qasr Al Hosn complex is just like an oasis of tranquility and heritage just in the middle of the city. So it's really phenomenal.
Yeah, I would agree to that. And this is the first trip that I've taken where that complex was complete. So to really stand in the center there and look at the cultural center and the prayer hall and the fort all together with the skyline, really, it's really quite magical. So I'm glad you found the same. Fran, would love to kick it over to you, allow you to introduce yourself, where you're based, and of course your impressions of the Abu Dhabi segment.
Sure, thank you, TK. My name is Fran Parente. I'm an architectural photographer. I'm based now in Brazil, and I travel a lot to New York, where I used to live a couple of years ago. I had no idea what I was going to find before that trip. I think, like most of the other attendees, our impressions of looking at big skyscrapers, modern contemporary architecture. And then when I got there, and specifically the tour with Sultan, showed me a different place, completely different, with modern heritage buildings and a really different mood of what I expected, in a way of a city that you can walk and you have the stores and the ground floor of the buildings, and that was a big surprise. And at the other end, you have the museum, the cultural district, with super contemporary Abu Dhabi, the Louvre, and to be able to see this difference, this contrast was incredible. I think it was really a great surprise.
Yeah, it seems like the underlying theme here is being surprised, and that's exactly what we hope to use this exhibition for, in educating Americans and surprising them, really. We have time for a couple of questions for Team Abu Dhabi. I'll kick one over to Brian, really addressing the current crisis that we live in. Doubtless, this is impacting your ability to practice photography freely right now, and maybe you could share a couple of ideas on some types of activities that you're doing from home, and maybe any advice to our audience members, to emerging photographers, on ways to stay busy and relevant and engaged.
Well, this situation has given me an opportunity to try and go through my image filing system. That's probably a bit of a personal problem. But yeah, having the time to look at that again is meaningful. But I think there are other things, you know. Many of us have blogs, and myself, I have a hard time keeping up with the blog. This has given me an opportunity to do that. And, you know, I think most of us use Photoshop and Lightroom, and those are very powerful tools. And, you know, now we have some time perhaps to delve into these tools and learn how to use them a little bit better, at least speaking for myself. I think, you know, one of the things that I find meaningful too personally is looking at older images and seeing how I can reconstitute them The passage of time often gives us a fresh perspective on an image. One image that we may not have really appreciated a few months or a few years ago maybe shows you a different thing in it, and makes you think, well, maybe that's worth something that I didn't see before. So that's a meaningful use of time. I think the other thing too is that we can always take a look at our images and see how we can look at them from a different perspective. You know, so I've noticed that some of our colleagues have posted some black and white images that maybe originally were color, and the black and white gives a new perspective to it. So I think we can often look at existing images and being stuck at home and figure out ways to reuse them in meaningful and artistic ways.
Yeah, that's great. And Layla, just to round out our Team Abu Dhabi segment, you know, the Architecture and Design Museum, where you serve as the Deputy Director, will serve, for the audience members, will serve as the first host venue of our traveling exhibition titled Building Identity. What do you hope, Layla, the audiences in the LA will take away from this?
My hope is to kind of give them a little taste of the experience we had, which is obviously difficult to do with an exhibit, but what I would hope is that they come in with a certain idea about the UAE and they leave having more of a historical background and kind of break the stereotype. I'm also really hoping, and this comes from conversations with Adina, who is speaking next, I think, that they'll find a tie between LA and Dubai and different cities in the UAE and start to really recognize that by looking at other cities in other countries, we can find very similar histories, and that can lead to understanding similar solutions. So that's
great. Thank you.
That's a big goal, but yeah, I hope so.
I think we're up for the challenge. So.
TK, if you don't mind, I was going to weigh in because there's something I chatted with Layla recently, and there's another thing she brought up, which I think is really relevant now in the time of that we're in, which was, there was another market that we went to, which was a fish market. We went, a few of us went in the evening, and it just an incredible kind of spontaneous environment. Sort of felt very, very natural, very kind of organic, literally on the water. And it made me think, because now that we're all stuck inside, and we're trying to get out, especially in cities, the parks are really, there are new challenges to deal with when we're out. And I think it made me think of sort of this kind of spontaneous space. We thought of Abu Dhabi and Dubai as having a lot of the public spaces. People talk about, people just go to the malls, and a lot of the newer spaces, they don't think as much about public space as maybe they have in the past. But they're there, and I realized that, like, despite the challenges of like extreme heat, for instance, like there are in crevices and nooks, there are public spaces in places you wouldn't necessarily think. And I think we're all going to have to rethink now that this has happened. We're all realizing just how important it is for us to socialize, because we go insane if we don't. So it's like, how do we keep that going? How do we make public spaces that can work in a new reality, whether it be from COVID or other issues, but also just all realizing that we need it, and we need to think about how valuable it is.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, I think the future of urban development really really stands to be, you know, looked at in different ways as a result of this crisis. And certainly we could probably build out a 2-hour program on the future of urban centers. And so that, we'll save that for another discussion, but it's a very, very interesting point. So thank you. Donna, we'll kick it over to you to start off Team Dubai for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to introduce Adina Hempel. Adina Hempel is an architect and associate professor and director at the Zayed Institute for Architecture, Heritage and the Arts at Zayed University in Dubai. Adina is no stranger to the UAE and has been visiting since 1998. She made the smartest decision when she moved here in 2008. Adina organized a walking tour for us in Old Dubai, and for me personally, it was a trip down memory lane and brought back beautiful, long forgotten memories of my childhood. Thank you, Adina, for being with us here today.
Thank you, Dana, for the kind words, and thank you, Dana and TK and Haytham for the invitation. And I do have to say, I think the UAE, specifically Dubai, has become a second home for sure. I've been here very long, and I think the same curiosity that I had when I initially came, and trying to sort of understand what is the space, what influences the architecture, what influences the cities, and what does that mean to the role of an architect we were just talking about city design or architecture itself. That very same quest and curiosity, I would say, still drives what I do today, a decade later. And I think one of the things that you could say is a silver line, is a line throughout all the work that I was fortunate enough to be involved in, is always related to the history of architecture. And we've heard from Sharjah and Dubai that, you know, the visits went to sort of the areas that are most forgotten, that are perhaps much less documented. There is incredible individuals, whether it be Reem and Sultan Al-Qasimi, who are working on the documentation of Sharjah, or it is Sultan who's documenting Abu Dhabi, but much more in terms of architecture history documentation of the country needs to be done. And I think the fact that a lot of that is not documented very easily leads to that misinterpretation, perhaps misunderstanding. And then you can arrive quickly at there's no authenticity. We're talking about a place that has no sense of place. And you can easily use words such as futuristic, when really, I think in Dubai, and perhaps being one of the more challenging cities, because you really have these two sides and they're very present next to each other. You have sort of that older part where Dana, you're saying it's down the memory lane. But then you also have the part that is incredibly documented. And then I think everybody has seen a picture of the new parts of Dubai, Burj Khalifa or Sheikh Zayed Road, and that undoubtedly informs what the city supposedly is about. So to me, when we were doing the walking tour, we went to the old part, Dera, and the Khor Dubai, Dubai Creek, and we were looking at the similar period post-oil, so 60s, 70s, 80s, up to the late 90s. That period that kind of connects the pre-oil, so the courtyard houses, to the, you could call it turn of the, not century, but yeah, century, to 2000 architecture, the skyscrapers, and kind of fills in that gap and creates that connection, so that I think what we were trying to do in that walking tour is to see what are the influences on that architecture in the era. What is really the identity of these souks? Is it really just about the spices and the nostalgia of that memory, or what is the connection to the purpose that actually shaped that space? We were looking at sort of the patterns and the materials of that architecture and how they may have been connected. Same thing to the origin of the creek itself, which is all about trade. And I think there's a very famous architect, Mies van der Rohe, everybody will know him. He made this very famous quote and said, form follows function. And I think if you turn function into trade, and you're trying to look through the lens of trade at specifically Dubai, I think you can very easily see how trade has literally influenced every single choice in architecture, whether it be the collage of elements that certainly exists, it be the different materials, it be the zonings, the setbacks, it be the functions of the buildings along the Khor Dubai or the water shore. And it also is at the end the connection to the newer part. So you have in Dera, the sea trade, but then you obviously have in the newer parts in Dubai that the delegation went to afterwards. You also have trade, but it's a digital trade. It's the stock market trade. It's the real estate trade. And similarly, these two parts are connected. And I think it is that period of the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, up to the 90s that a lot of people will not know. And I think seeing that probably creates this connection between an older part and a newer part, and hopefully gives a little bit of understanding what the architecture history of a place such as Dubai is about. I give it back to you, Dana. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ashley, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your impressions of Dubai?
Yes, hi, I'm Ashley Mendelson, Assistant Curator of Architecture and Digital Initiatives at the Guggenheim Museum in New York. I had actually been to Dubai previously, just once, so I think as Adina was saying, that is the emirate that maybe most of us were most familiar with prior to going, but also my experience having just visited my brother who had lived there briefly was really different than this trip. And I think that mostly kind of echoing what Darren was saying, we were kind of very quickly seeing the different character in each emirate, just with the built environment that was so clear. And I think that Old Dubai and the kind of narrow winding roads really exemplifies that. One of the highlights for me, just before the walking tour, we went to Al Shindaga Museum, a kind of cultural history museum, which really focused on personal stories in telling that heritage through these, incredibly immersive exhibitions. And I think that generally, everyone on this delegation is really excited about learning about history, really interested in mid-century modernism. So we kind of all had that excitement and approach. But then it was really reassuring and wonderful to have tours from people like Adina, Reem, and Sultan, but also kind of recognize that there's such an energy in being interested in documenting and telling this history. There were a couple of other highlights. I mean, we did so much in Dubai, but I, obviously I'm really interested in the kind of cultural, like art museum experiences that we had, and the Jamil Art Center really stood out. And when we were there was such a timely exhibition called Phantom Limb, which was really focused on our relationship to heritage, how history can be rewritten, but also an interest in reclaiming lost histories. And I felt like that really kind of embodied and aligned with the work that Adina, Sultan, and Reem are doing.
Great. Bob, would you like to now talk about yourself a little and share your impressions of Dubai?
Sure. If everyone can hear me, I'm Bob Cook. I'm a practicing architect in New York City with the design firm FX Collaborative, and my career focus has been on schools and university buildings, as well as large-scale affordable housing, almost always in hyper-dense urban environments. So the idea of moving through and around dense urban fabrics drives much of my design thinking and day-to-day life. Along with this large-scale framework, I also try to stay rooted in culture and community. The idea that urban space and architecture is often experienced at a very intimate scale, both physically and emotionally. Dubai was very fascinating from this perspective. Like visiting most well-developed metropolitan centers in the world, my first thoughts were focused on the city's core and how expansive Dubai is, including the sheer mega scale of development, as well as the implementation of building technologies. But my deeper interest is in the peeling back of the layers just a little bit and understanding how Dubai and the other Emirates has responded to the idea of vernacular architecture, which is a challenge for every modern culture, particularly non-Western cultures. Vernacular architecture meaning an architecture that has a sense of place and is rooted in a region's culture, that the architecture in the Emirates is unique and couldn't have been constructed anywhere else or designed anywhere else. So an example would be the Museum of the Future, which is fully a parametric building that's designed and constructed with the latest generative software. It's up on the screen now. So technology is in the DNA of this museum, while I would say the museum wears its sense of place on its sleeve. We can get into that a little bit too, but now the elephant in the room is the Burj Khalifa, and its sense of place is in part represented by a formal design metaphor of a regional desert flower. It's surprising to me that the tallest skyscraper in the world can be seen to have a component of vernacular architecture, but the Burj Khalifa has that component in its very footprint. So for me, the Emirates is rich with the idea of vernacular architecture and how to represent and safeguard culture and design. I see it as a common thread in each of the Emirates that we all visited back in November.
Feels like a very long time ago. Lara, would you like to talk a little bit about yourself and your experiences in Dubai?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Lara Swimmer. I'm a photographer of architecture in the built environment. I'm based in Seattle. And I travel around a lot around the country normally with architecture firms and design firms. And my work has obviously come to a complete standstill. The majority of my projects are public projects, university projects. I shoot a lot of schools. I shoot a lot of libraries, and none of that is really happening right now. So most of my work is considered probably non-essential in the work that my clients are doing. So it's on hold. Hopefully it'll happen again this summer. But yeah, we're really lucky that we got to squeeze in this trip before everything came down. This was an amazing opportunity, as everyone's spoken about, really eye-opening and surprising on lots of levels. I'm really interested in hearing what everyone has to say right now, because we really haven't had a chance to convene since then and to hear everyone's impressions here and just go through the whole panel. It's really bringing it all back for me. Dubai was a city of contrast for sure. The modern stuff that we were all kind of aware of and expecting that's just kind of a piece of it. What we got to experience with Adina on her tour was really amazing. So for me, kind of getting beyond all the museums, which were a huge part of it, the Creek tour and seeing Old Dubai was really, really a fascinating experience, and one that really stuck with me. But the way the city is organized around the Creek and the way so much has been infilled to create the modern city. It's fascinating, the engineering and the engineering that was basically created with the water to construct the city was really pretty amazing. But I think the museum experience in Dubai was what stuck with me the most, because we saw such an array of museums and they were all so incredibly well done. The Etihad Museum, where the covenant, where the country was signed into all the Emirates came together in 1970, and they created this incredible museum to commemorate that, with a historic portion and a modern portion. And one day, I think we saw 4 museums. It was just delirious. Maybe our second day on tour. So the Jameel Art Center was the final stop that day. The Museum of the Future, we had an amazing site tour. And that was incredible for me, because I think the first 10 years of my work as an architecture photographer, I shot on construction sites, and I shot significant public buildings that took 2 to 4 years to be built. So it's sort of symbolic for me that this was the one image selected for the exhibit is actually a construction shot from the outside of the building. Of course, we weren't permitted to share any of our shots from the inside tour because it was obviously under wraps. So yeah, just an incredible building. It reminds me a lot of the Geary projects that I've had the opportunity to shoot in the States that are just crazy feats of engineering. So that was pretty special, being privileged to get to go on this tour. Yeah, I just feel like we were an incredibly privileged group. The tours that were arranged were just tailored to all of our wonders, and all of our different photography, architecture, history, museum design. Everything was completely tailored for us, and we couldn't barely keep up. There was just so much, but it was fantastic, and Dubai really was quite exciting. I mean, there's so much iconic architecture as well. Like in Andrew's shots here, you see this incredible vistas of all the high rises and the Burj Khalifa, whatnot. But there were so many great projects like that we got the chance to see. So it was amazing.
That leads us perfectly to Andrew to introduce himself and talk a little bit about his experiences in Dubai.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you all again. My name is Andrew Frokos. I'm an architectural and fine art photographer based in New York. And I also have a small gallery in Manhattan of large-scale photography of my own work. So I'm operating also a retail aspect to my business. So I think that I'd just like to echo what both Lara and Adina said. When I was extended the invitation, I think we were all kind of in shock first to be offered the opportunity, and very grateful. But mostly what I do entails a lot of long exposure, very slow moving type of photography, which is on tripod. I realized that that probably wasn't going to be possible during the first few days of the tour. So I decided to extend and do my own kind of agenda of photography till after the tour had wrapped up. And so I think I saw a different aspect during the tour that I feel very grateful to have been exposed to, because I never would have seen that just passing through the city quickly, trying to capture what I needed to capture, which is what I typically shoot, right? The wide scale perspective, things with a lot of detail. And so what really stuck with me in particular, not just the megalopolis and the go, go, go of Dubai, and I mean, it's very impressive and overwhelming, but the fact that it seems like the society and the culture is at a point of inflection now where they've decided to tell the story more of, this is who we are as a people, this is our society, we want you to know more about us and our culture than just what you see on, you know, the bling that you see about Dubai and the spectacle of Dubai. And I think that that's been executed in such a mind-blowing way all throughout the country, Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But the smaller scale museums that we visited in Deira with Dina, they leave a more indelible, they leave a memory with you. You have, it creates an actual personal experience with the museum. It's not just about being overwhelmed by the space. It really, the Museum of Perfume Design, for example, which is still under construction. We got a lot of behind the scenes tours. It's just, there's so much, it's being put together in such a thoughtful way to convey very important concepts about the culture that is something that I haven't seen before. I don't think that's really being done very much in the United States. So certainly the Louvre Abu Dhabi in Abu Dhabi is mind-blowing, but the smaller scale, old quarter parts of Dubai were a big surprise to me. And I think that leaves you with a warmer, kind of more heartwarming perspective of the city, a sense of who the people are, the real life, and kind of welcoming sense to the city, which I hope that a lot of other people experience as it develops, as the, you know, the historical aspect of the city is more fleshed out. So I mean, I just thought it was it's probably something I never would have explored on my own. As a photographer, we just are kind of prepared with our equipment to hit the ground running, and we need to get what we need to get by the end of the day. It's hard work, and sometimes there's no time left over to explore the more intimate quarters of the city, or there's just no time, there's not enough time or energy left to go off the trail. So I think we were all very, very fortunate to have experienced this side of Dubai.
So I'll ask one question before I open it up to the audience, because I'm sure they have a lot of questions to ask you all. And my question is, what surprised you the most about the UAE, and what stuck with you? Who should we have? Ashley, you can answer that.
Sure. I mean, I think that I would really just echo what everyone has been saying in terms of just a rich history that we weren't aware of. And, you know, these cities were built in such short spans of time. And I think that that time scale and just influences that were global allowed for a type of architecture that is really unique. And so, you know, we've been referring to some of the state mandates that came in, and it was so interesting to be able to, as we walked around with Adina, Reem, and Sultan, they were able to kind of very quickly identify what era any building was from just based on certain characteristics that it embodied. And I always love that part of architectural history, when you can kind of, you know, if you are walking around Rome and you look at the thickness of the grout, you can kind of identify where in history it was built. And just those small details, I think, are really special. So I just was so, it's such a privilege to walk around with people who have that deep knowledge and can share with us, so we can hopefully share with others.
Great. Thank you, everyone. So I see 2 questions in the chat, but if anyone has any other questions, if you scroll to the bottom of your screen, you've got a Q&A. So if you can type your question there, but I'll ask the 2 questions that I see. So one of them was, when you take those photos to the cities, so I think they're talking about the planning of the touring exhibition. Are you planning on working with universities so that students and professors can also see them? And how do you connect such experiences to a younger generation of architects and artists? TK, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, of course. Give a shout out to the woman who proposed the question, was Ms. Mei Shi, who's currently rotating off as chair of the Meridian Center for Cultural Diplomacy. So thank you, May, for a thoughtful question. We likely will work with universities in all cities that we reach. It's also possible that we may look to exhibit at a university. We always find that universities are excellent partners with their built-in audience, and young minds are thirsty for new perspectives. I think for any city that we take it to, LA being our first, we would undoubtedly reach out to the leading universities there, USC, UCLA, and others, to try to get not just students into the space, but for every stop, we're going to develop public programs. And through that, we're going to need experts, scholars, and folks who can come in and contribute to the narrative. So thank you for the question. And yes, a big goal of this is not just to show a photo show, but to really educate really everybody, with perhaps an emphasis on some of the younger minds and the younger scholars to learn more. And as Darren said, maybe encourage them to visit the region at some point.
Yeah, I think one of our past traveling art exhibition, we actually did partner with a lot of university museums, because as TK mentioned, that helped as well with getting that younger audience to come visit.
And there's a good question from Wael Al-Awar, whom we got to spend some time with while in Dubai. He writes, true architecture is about the experience. Any ideas of how that experience could be added or incorporated to the exhibition, or is it simply a photo exhibit? I'll take first crack at that, but would love for anyone to weigh in. I think Wael, you've really nailed it right on the head there. We do not want this to be just a photo exhibition. In fact, much of what you've heard today, we hope audiences will learn through visiting the exhibition. So a lot of folks here on the call are actually going to contribute thoughtful essays to help guide audiences through that personal experience of architecture. We definitely want to create a situation where folks aren't coming in, looking at these amazing photos and leaving. We want them to leave with an appreciation of the heritage of the UAE and how they've incorporated that into their built environment. I would open that up to anybody else who would like to address that particular question.
Yeah, if I may, I can address that. And we should say that the plan of the exhibition is still very much in the works, so nothing is set yet. But I would suggest, and I don't want to overstep by any means, but I think it is important for any architecture show, yes, to include essays that will really round out what the pictures are about. It's really should be, and it is going to be a well thought out show as far as themes, as far as what we're trying to tell and what we're trying to share. But I also think physically there is a chance that we could try to make that experience a little bit more spatial than just like a typical gallery. And it can be done, I've experienced from curating shows, it doesn't have to be something that's going to blow the bank and be very expensive. It can be done in very simple but effective ways. And we're lucky that our team on this is not just incredibly talented architectural photographers, which is really the bulk of it, but we also have a couple of curators on this team, myself included and Ashley included, which I think we can help lead some, give some advice or some guidance on that. And we also have some really talented architects, including Craig and Bob, and I think that, you know, if we all put our heads together, there are ways to make this really a special kind of unique experience and make it, you know, and make it very doable. So that's an exciting part of what we're looking at.
Yeah, I want to let the audience know too that we are going to publish a publication that will include all of these essays, and we'll be looking to disseminate that to a much wider audience than the 3 cities that we're visiting.
For those of you that don't know, Wael Al-Awar is the architect for the Jameel Art Center, and we were very fortunate to have him take us around during our last visit. Another question we got was, clearly new construction is taken very seriously in the UAE. I have heard from the panel a strong heart for the old parts of these cities. What is the state of preservation in Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai? Adina, Sultan, or Reem, do one of you want to take these questions, that question?
I can maybe speak a bit on some of the work that, you know, perhaps I have been doing together with the Ministry of Culture and Knowledge Development, and also through some of the exhibitions and publications I've been involved in. One was the National Pavilion of the UAE in 2014, and then also in itself, for example, was the Dubai Municipality, Dubai Culture and Dubai Tourism and Commerce for the Sharjah, for the Al Shindaqa museums. I think preservation is something that is very much underway, and there is a lot of effort put into preservation, specifically so, and it's very advanced on the buildings prior to the 60s. A lot of documentation and classification is right now happening. Buildings from the 60s up to the 90s, and those are the buildings that perhaps are much less documented right now. I think the book that Sultan Al-Qasimi is working on will do a huge step towards understanding that period in Sharjah. There is a lot of work done about this kind of modern, I don't really want to use the word modern because modern can have a very different connotation. So let's call it modern with a lower M, not a capital M. Of that period of tremendous and rapid change and transformation. In Dubai, there's a lot done by the authorities there, and Abu Dhabi as well has an incredible team, part of DCT, that is working on it. And I think every emirate has started to work on it, and there perhaps needs to be much more done in other parts of the country, that whether it be Al Quraim or Ras Al Khaimah, where there is still a lot of that period that is not even documented and that perhaps is entirely unknown. So I think it is very much in the works, and one most important element is there needs to be publications and shared knowledge about it. And I think this is where publications and exhibitions, whether it be the one that we're talking about right now, or it be the different exhibitions and publications that have been produced already, or hopefully that will come, will aid a helping hand towards also for a global audience to understand that part of history more.
Great. And so another question was, it was mentioned that buildings are meant to be experienced and seen, and photography attempts to capture this. While it is great to learn that this exhibition will tour various communities and will learn what the delegation experienced and also become surprised, in our current situation, but also for some who may not have the opportunity to travel and visit the UAE, are there other ways that people can experience this exhibition? Has there been any discussion of seeing this virtually online? So we have actually spoken about having potentially maybe doing this online if the situation continues, because we are quite eager on having this exhibition out there for people to see. Apart from it being, you know, touring the cities, we will probably have a website dedicated to this where we would be able to show the photographs, and we will be producing a catalogue as well. Which would have more in-depth photos as well as essays from some of the participants, some of the experts, both in the United Arab Emirates and the United States. TK, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, you know, regarding the crisis, I think many museums and many presentations are going to have to shift to a virtual reality. I think we would be remiss not to develop an online platform for this. It certainly is, irrespective of the crisis, it's just a good way to get the story out. I think now we're sort of in the middle of this crisis. We do need to be more creative in how we tell this story and share with audiences, perhaps not just in America, really creating a platform that can be organic, and maybe we can add to it and continue to do so in the future. So thank you. Very thoughtful and timely question.
I mean, I just want to add to that a little bit. I don't know if you guys can hear me. I'm having some internet weirdness.
We can.
Okay, cool. But like at the museum, we've been dealing with that a lot, how to make our exhibits virtual for this. And I think it provides a really great opportunity to kind of add audio, to add different elements that otherwise wouldn't really be possible, and make them accessible 24/7. So we talk about having auxiliary program with this exhibit and with others. And I think it's a really important opportunity to make those kinds of things like this event today, available whenever people need it. So yeah, just adding to the exhibit rather than just putting it online, I think is really important.
Yeah, and as the first host venue, we look forward to working with you and your team, Layla, and really developing an innovative approach to disseminating this information. So I think we're all in a unique experience right now where everyone's at home rethinking the way they do things. So I think this would be a good litmus test on what we're able to do. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that now that this has become, the virtual world has become, so mainstream now because of this, I also think the technologies available to do virtual exhibits are going to get better and better, and also more accessible. So we're all going to learn from this, because we can probably, we're going to find new ways to do this, and sort of be on the leading edge of the next wave of this, of putting up virtual shows. So it's exciting.
That's right.
I wanted to thank personally Sultan Al-Qasimi because he really was instrumental when helping us put together this delegation and basically introducing us to the right people and places to visit. So thank you, Sultan, for your ongoing support. And then another thing, I'd like to again just remind everyone about the two platforms. So there's our new Instagram account at UAE Culture USA, and that one's there. And that one we're going to be updating it more frequently now with a lot of content that's happening both in the United States as well as here in the United Arab Emirates. And then the other one would be your online resource for all virtual art tours and the sorts that's happening here in the United Arab Emirates, and that's at www.uaeusaunited.com/virtual experiences. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today for our first iteration of our virtual discussions. We will be doing more of these over the next couple of months, as I mentioned before, so please follow us on Instagram, and we'll definitely be updating when we have our next discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Nice to see everybody again.
Yes. Let's do it again.
Yes.